Welcome back, everybody, to Crime Podcastle Unsolved Mystery Series, episode 63.
63 already.
I know, can you believe it?
Time flies.
It really does.
Yeah.
So today we are diving into a case that's fascinating and unsettling, to say the least.
Yeah.
The unsolved murder of Advocate Arvind Verma in Lucknow, India, back in 2011.
Back in 2011.
It's a story that takes us into the world of high-stakes legal battles,
Right.
powerful figures, and the risks that come with challenging the status quo.
Yeah, a lot of risk there.
And we've got eyewitness accounts, police reports, a whole web of theories to untangle.
So let's get started.
Okay.
What's so intriguing about this case is it's not just about finding a killer.
Right.
It raises questions about the very systems of justice and the price some people pay for trying to uphold them.
Exactly. It's about more than just whodunit. It's about the context and the why.
The why.
So to understand that, let's start with Arvind Verma himself.
Okay.
Who was he?
All right, so imagine a courtroom.
Okay.
And picture a man in his mid-40s commanding attention with his sharp intellect and fearless advocacy. That was Arvind Verma, a senior advocate in Lucknow, known for taking on cases that many others wouldn't touch.
I'm already getting a sense of his courage, but what kind of cases are we talking about?
Verma was deeply committed to social justice.
Okay.
He fought for the marginalized, took on corruption cases, and went head-to-head with some very influential figures, both in politics and business.
Wow.
This wasn't some lawyer in an ivory tower. He was in the trenches fighting for what he believed in.
So he was putting himself directly in the line of fire, so to speak.
Absolutely. And that's where it gets really interesting and unsettling, because lawyers like Verma, who challenge those in power, often face serious risks.
Like what?
Intimidation threats, and sadly, sometimes even worse.
Which brings us to February 12th, 2011.
2011.
The day Verma was murdered. I read that it happened in broad daylight in a busy area. Is that right?
Yes, right near Hazratganj, a bustling commercial district in Lucknow.
Wow.
Verma was in his car approaching an intersection when two men on a motorcycle suddenly intercepted him.
Oh.
They fired multiple shots, killing him instantly, and then vanished into the crowd.
That's incredibly brazen. It almost feels like a message, a very public display of violence.
It does, doesn't it?
Why do you think they chose to do it that way?
That's a question that puzzled investigators from the start.
I bet.
You'd think a targeted hit would be more discreet, right?
Right.
But this was almost theatrical, meant to be seen.
Yeah.
It certainly sent shockwaves through the city, especially the legal community.
It makes you wonder if there was a secondary motive beyond just eliminating Verma.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they wanted to instill fear to discourage others from following in his footsteps.
It's definitely a possibility, and it's a reminder of the chilling effect violence can have on those who are fighting for justice. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the investigation itself.
Okay.
Where did the police focus their efforts initially?
Given Verma's line of work, I'd imagine they looked closely at his professional life, right?
Exactly. They knew Verma had made a lot of powerful enemies over the years. So his cases became a key focus. Think about it. You've got influential political figures, people connected to criminal syndicates.
Yeah.
The list of potential suspects must have been extensive.
Talk about a tangled web. I can only imagine the challenges investigators faced trying to get people to talk, especially if they were afraid of those powerful figures you mentioned.
Absolutely. Witness intimidation is a major hurdle in cases like this.
Yeah.
Imagine you saw something or you know something, but you're terrified of the consequences of coming forward.
Right.
That fear can be paralyzing.
It makes me think about that old saying, silence is golden. But in this case, silence might have protected the guilty.
That's the tragic irony of it all. And in Verma's case, there's another layer of complexity. He had received death threats before his murder, but he chose not to report them to the police.
Wow, really? That's both incredibly brave and incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he report them?
It seems that Verma was determined to continue his work without being deterred by threats. It speaks to his unwavering commitment, but it also underscores the level of risk he was willing to endure. And it's something that investigators had to grapple with as they tried to piece together a motive.
It makes me wonder if those threats were connected to a specific case, something that ultimately led to his murder. Did the investigators uncover any leads in that regard?
That's precisely what they were trying to determine, and this is where the theories about Verma's murder come into play, because with so many potential enemies, there were a number of different angles to consider.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into those theories.
All right.
Can you give us a rundown of the main ones that emerged?
Absolutely. But before we do that, I think it's important to take a step back and consider the broader context of Lucknow at the time, because to understand why someone might want Arvind Verma dead, We need to understand the environment he was operating in.
That's a great point. It's all about understanding the bigger picture, right?
Right.
So what was Lucknow like back then?
Lucknow in 2011 was a city of contradictions.
Okay.
It was experiencing rapid economic growth, but it was also grappling with deeply entrenched corruption and a powerful criminal underworld.
Hmm.
Think of a place where traditional values clash with modern ambitions, where the lines between right and wrong can get blurred. That's the world Arvind Verma was navigating.
So a complex and potentially dangerous world, especially for someone like Verma, who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. It's starting to paint a clearer picture of the forces he was up against.
Exactly, and it's within that context that we need to examine the theories about his murder, because each theory in its own way reflects a different aspect of Lucknow's underbelly.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's start unpacking those theories.
Well, the first theory that investigators explored focused on professional rivalry, given the competitive nature of the legal profession. It's not unheard of for disputes to escalate dramatically.
Right, so we're talking about someone who saw Verma as a threat, maybe someone whose career he'd negatively impacted in some way.
Precisely, think of a high-profile case, a lot of money at stake, and two ambitious lawyers vying for the upper hand. Could a contentious legal battle or even a deep-seated professional jealousy have spiraled into violence?
It's certainly plausible. I imagine the stakes can get pretty high in those kinds of legal circles.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence did investigators find to support this theory?
Well, they looked closely at Verma's recent cases, particularly those involving large sums of money or powerful individuals.
Okay.
They were trying to identify any adversaries who might have had both the motive and the means to orchestrate a hit.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious about the second theory you mentioned, the one about political retaliation.
Ah, yes. That's where things get even more intriguing. Remember, Verma was known for his outspoken stance against corruption.
Right.
And he represented clients who challenged powerful political figures.
Yeah.
So investigators had to consider the possibility that someone sought revenge for his actions.
It's chilling to think that someone might be silenced for simply speaking truth to power. But I'm also a bit skeptical. Wouldn't a politically motivated hit be more likely to happen discreetly rather than in such a brazen public manner?
That's a valid point, and it's something that investigators debated as well.
Yeah.
On the one hand, a public execution could be seen as a way to send a message to deter others from challenging the establishment. But on the other hand, it carries a much higher risk of exposure and arrest.
It's a puzzle for sure.
Yeah.
So what kind of evidence, if any, did investigators find to support this theory?
They looked into Verma's political cases, examining any potential connections between his clients and those who might have benefited from his demise. They interviewed politicians, bureaucrats, anyone who might have had a grudge against him or his work.
Sounds like a daunting task, especially in a system where power and influence can easily be used to cover tracks.
You're absolutely right, and that's why this case has remained unsolved for so long. The truth, it seems, is buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear.
It's frustrating, but it's also what makes this case so compelling. We're dealing with a web of power dynamics, personal vendettas, and perhaps even a conspiracy to silence a voice that was getting too loud.
Exactly. And as we delve deeper into the remaining theories, we'll uncover even more layers of complexity.
I can't wait.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have.
It's time to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll explore the remaining theories and the lingering questions that continue to haunt this case.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity. I'm eager to hear more about those other theories, especially the one involving organized crime.
Oh, yeah.
I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface of this mystery.
Oh, we're just getting started. And as we unravel the remaining threads of this case, I think you'll find that the truth is often stranger than fiction.
Well, listeners, you heard it here first. Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the murder of Advocate Arvind Verma, where we'll explore the darker corners of Lucknow and the forces that may have conspired to silence him.
Welcome back to CrimePod Castle Unsolved Mystery Series, episode 63. Before the break, we were discussing the theories surrounding Advocate Arvind Verma's murder, specifically focusing on professional rivalry and political retaliation. Right. Now let's delve into the third theory, the possibility of organized crime involvement.
Okay, this is where things could get really interesting. We've already established that Lucknow had a significant criminal underworld. How did Verma's work intersect with that world?
Well, remember, Verma was a fearless advocate taking on cases that many others wouldn't touch.
Right.
Some of those cases inevitably would have brought him into contact with criminal elements. Think land disputes, financial scams, things like that.
So he was stepping on some very powerful toes that were connected to organized crime.
Exactly. And we're not just talking about small-time crooks here. Lucknow has a history of organized crime syndicates with deep roots in the city's politics and economy. These are groups that operate with impunity, using violence and intimidation to protect their interests.
It's starting to sound like something out of a movie, but this was Verna's reality. Did investigators find any specific links between him and any known criminal organizations?
They certainly tried. They dug into his case files, looking for any connections to ongoing criminal investigations. They also interviewed informants, trying to gather intelligence about any potential threats Verma might have been facing.
And what did they find?
Well, the details are still murky, but there were whispers, rumors about a particular case. Verma was working on a case that struck a nerve with a powerful criminal syndicate.
Ooh, this is getting good. Can you give us any more specifics about this case?
Unfortunately, the specifics are still shrouded in secrecy, but what we do know is that this case involved a land dispute, a lot of money, and some very influential players. It seems that Verma's involvement in this case had upset the balance of power, making him a target.
It's like a classic noir film, right? The lone lawyer taking on the mob, fighting for justice against all odds.
That's a pretty apt comparison, and just like in those films, the reality was much grittier and more dangerous. Remember, these are organized criminal groups that don't hesitate to use violence to silence their enemies.
It makes you wonder how much investigators were able to uncover, given the code of silence that often surrounds organized crime.
That's a valid point. Witnesses are often reluctant to come forward, fearing for their lives and the lives of their families, and even if they do talk, their testimony might not be enough to secure a conviction.
So despite these challenges, did the police manage to gather any concrete evidence linking organized crime to Verma's murder?
There were certainly some intriguing leads, but nothing conclusive enough to lead to an arrest. There were rumors of a getaway car seen near the crime scene, a car linked to a known associate of a prominent crime boss. There were also reports of unusual financial transactions in the days leading up to the murder transactions that hinted at a possible motive.
So a lot of smoke, but no fire, at least not enough to bring charges.
Exactly. The evidence was circumstantial, open to interpretation, and with witnesses too afraid to testify, the investigation hit a wall.
It's incredibly frustrating, knowing that the perpetrators might be out there walking free, while Verma's family and friends are still searching for answers.
It's a tragedy, no doubt, and it speaks to the power of organized crime, its ability to operate in the shadows to evade justice.
So with that in mind, let's move on to the fourth and final theory, the possibility of a personal dispute.
This one is a bit more speculative, as the investigation didn't uncover any solid evidence to support it, but it's worth considering nonetheless.
Right, because everyone has a personal life, and sometimes those conflicts can spill over in unexpected and tragic ways.
Exactly. Investigators explored all avenues, looking into Verma's family relationships, his friendships, any potential rivalries or grudges that might have existed outside of his professional life.
And what did they find?
To be honest, not much. Verma seemed to have a solid family life, and his friends and colleagues described him as a kind and generous person.
So this theory was more of a just-in-case scenario, a way to make sure they weren't missing any potential motives.
Precisely, it's standard procedure in any murder investigation to explore all possible angles, even if they seem unlikely.
Makes sense. But with all these theories floating around, it must have been difficult for investigators to narrow down their focus.
Absolutely. It was like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, and each theory presented its own set of challenges.
It's starting to feel like we're hitting a dead end. So many possibilities, yet so little concrete evidence. It's enough to make you wonder if we'll ever truly know what happened to Arvind Verma.
That's the frustrating reality of cold cases like this. Sometimes the truth remains elusive, hidden beneath layers of time, fear, and silence.
But even if we never get definitive answers, there are still some important takeaways from this case, aren't there?
Absolutely. Verma's story, even without a neat resolution, forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about the systems we live in, the power dynamics at play, and the risks associated with challenging those in power.
It's a sobering reminder that justice isn't always served, and that sometimes the good guys don't win.
It is, but it's also a reminder that even in the face of such darkness, the pursuit of truth and accountability is still worth fighting for.
Right, because even if we can't bring Verma's killers to justice, we can honor his memory by continuing to ask questions to challenge injustice wherever we see it.
Well said, and that's the spirit of the Deep Dive, isn't it? We're not just here to passively consume information. We're here to engage, to analyze, to search for meaning, even in the most perplexing of cases.
Exactly. And speaking of searching for meaning, we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. We've explored the life and death of Arvind Verma, delved into the theories surrounding his murder, and grappled with the complex realities of power, corruption, and violence.
We've examined the potential roles of professional rivalry, political retaliation, and organized crime, and we've even considered the possibility of a personal motive, however unlikely. But despite all our efforts, the central question remains unanswered. Who killed Arvind Verma?
It's a question that continues to haunt this case, a question that demands an answer. But as we wrap up this episode, I want to turn it over to you, the listener. What are your thoughts? What stands out to you as the most compelling aspect of this case?
And what would you investigate further if you were given the chance? Just share your insights with us on social media, and let's continue this conversation.
Welcome back to CrimePod Castle Unsolved Mystery Series, Episode 63. It's time to wrap up our deep dive into the unsolved murder of Advocate Arvind Verma. We've examined the evidence, explored the theories, and grappled with the complex realities of power, corruption, and violence in Lucknow, India. But even after all this, the central question remains, who killed Arvind Verma and why?
It's a question that continues to linger, a question that demands an answer. And while we may never know the full truth, I think this deep dive has shed light on some important issues.
Absolutely. This case is about so much more than just one man's murder. It's a story about courage, about the risks associated with fighting for justice, and about the shadowy forces that often operate with impunity.
We've seen how professional rivalries can escalate into violence, how political agendas can be used to silence dissent, and how organized crime can weave its tendrils deep into the fabric of society.
It's a stark reminder that even in a democracy, those who challenge the status quo often face serious dangers. And it begs the question, what can be done to protect those who are fighting for a more just world?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a question that goes beyond the scope of this particular case. It's a question that societies around the world are grappling with.
You know, as we were discussing the various theories, I couldn't help but think about Verma's decision not to report those death threats. What do you make of that?
It's a complex issue. On the one hand, it speaks to his unwavering commitment to his work, his refusal to be intimidated. But on the other hand, it raises questions about the effectiveness of law enforcement in protecting those who are most vulnerable.
Right, because if someone like Verma, a prominent lawyer with connections, felt that reporting threats wouldn't make a difference, what does that say about the average citizen's ability to seek protection?
It's a sobering thought, and it underscores the need for robust systems of accountability for law enforcement agencies that are truly independent and committed to protecting the rights of all citizens.
It also makes me think about the role of the media in cases like this. Verma's murder made headlines, but did it spark any real change? Did it lead to any meaningful reforms?
That's a difficult question to answer. There was certainly public outcry demands for justice, but whether that translated into tangible action is debatable.
It's often said that sunlight is the best disinfectant, but in this case it seems that darkness has prevailed.
Perhaps. But even if justice remains elusive, stories like Verma's serve as important reminders. They remind us of the fragility of justice, the power of silence, and the courage it takes to stand up for what's right.
They also remind us that we as citizens have responsibility to demand accountability, to support those who are fighting for a more just world, and to never let stories like Verma's fade into obscurity.
Well said. Because the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, a process that requires constant vigilance and a commitment to holding those in power accountable.
And on that note, I want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a journey filled with twists, turns, and unanswered questions. But even without a neat resolution, I think we've all learned something valuable today.
We've gained insights into the complexities of the Indian legal system, the challenges of fighting corruption, and the human cost of seeking justice.
And we've been reminded that even in the face of tragedy, there is still hope. Hope that one day the truth will prevail. And if you'd like to delve deeper into Advocate Verma's case, you can find photos and links to articles in the show notes for this episode.
Be sure to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. We're always on the lookout for compelling stories that shed light on the darker corners of the human experience. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.